This is part one of the form creation tutorial. Part one is going to cover how do you create web forms in Drupal. Basically, what web form is any type of survey, any type of registration, anytime you need user input that you're going to have to parse or you want to get information about. So the second part is going to be how do we get the information? How do we configure how that information comes back to us or is transmitted? So to begin part one, we're going to start and go to a group that we want to create a web form for. So I'm going to go to the group Communications and Marketing here, and I am going to go and beginning to create a web form. To do that, I begin by clicking on web form in my create content links on the right. This again is on the home page of my group. That's where this link will be available. If I click on that, it brings me to a page that offers me a title and body. Now I'm going to say new conference, if I could spell, registration. And down here in the body is any information we want above the web form. So a general introduction. So I'm just going to write the words gen intro. Okay, and now I'm going to save. Now the way this is one of the trickier parts is once I create that, it tells me it's created, but I'm back at my home page. So in order to begin the next process, we have to scroll down to our group content block at the bottom of our page and find the web form. Because these are ordered by the most recently edited, it almost always is at the top. But you can see here it says web form. You can search for it by name. You can sort it by web form, but it's almost always going to be at the top here. I'm going to click edit, and it's going to bring me right back to that same information I was on. But what we see now is some extra tabs over here. Most importantly, the web form tab. This tab allows us to do the web form creation. So I'm going to click on it, and we are brought to a form here on the left, an area of the form, and then some fields on the right. On the right we see text field, text area, email, number, etc. And all of these items can be dragged over to the form preview area to create a form. So I'm going to begin just by showing, because that's sometimes the easiest, how to create some fields. So here I drag text field over to the left and drop it in this area. Anywhere in this area, now I see it have an area that says new text field. So this field is a fillable field that you would want to get information where somebody would enter text. So oftentimes it's used for something like name. And now if I click this close, it goes back down and we see we have a name field here. In order to go back edit, you can double click anywhere in here or click the edit on the little pencil and we get the name. And so I'm going to go through what options you have. Title is the name. Display, we can move the text in line and now we see the name is in front of it. We can also set the size to less if we want the size to only be 30 characters. If somebody you expect shorter input, the name could probably be 35 characters. And then validation. Validation is what is required. Is this a required field? I'm going to say yes. You have to fill in your field. Some fields will have extra information, max length of characters, etc., but for the most part, what is usually done in validation is required. So I'm going to click close, and now we see there's a star by the field. This indicates that it's a required field. We can also copy a field via this. So if I click this, I get a copy of the field with all the same parameters. And so now I'm just going to change the name to how are you. Now I have an exact copy of that field, but I changed the title of it. I also want to change some information. I'm going to say this one should be 55 characters. It's a bigger question, and then I'm going to close it. And now I see I have a name and a field that says how are you, but I'm going to go back in and say I don't want this in line. I want the title above it. So if I do that and I close it, now we have, you can see a little bit different layout. So that's how you're able to sort of style the layouts and change the information. We also have a email field that's designed to get email. If I drag it over, it says new email. I'm going to do the same process and change this to email. And I'm going to say, oh, this is required as well. And I'm going to leave the display above it and leave the size alone so that it doesn't have any limit on it. So now we've got a few fields, the kind of the standard fillable fields that you're used to seeing, but there are a lot more options. I'm going to start by showing the radio buttons. This is a field that you put on a form if you want the user to select exclusively one item, 1, 2, or 3, not multiple options. We'll talk about multiple options next, but I'm going to give you a sense of this first. If I click edit on here, we see new radios. We're going to say session attending. Okay, so suppose we're having 3 sessions for this. And so, but we have session attending 1, 2, or 3, but that's not the name of my sessions. We're going to go click over here in options, and we see we can change the names here. We're going to say morning, afternoon, evening. And now we look above, we can see that those have changed. So now we have session attending, morning, afternoon, evening. We can also do validation. Are they required to click on it? Now, if you choose validation, you'll note that there's already something selected by default. So asking for them to click on it doesn't make any sense. So what is best to do is, if you want them to require to have to select something, you should click the no default in the options. If I do that, you can see there's nothing selected. Now validation is required. They will have to select a particular field because nothing is selected. So that's the sessions attending. But I want to step back into here and show that what we did in the previous one, we changed some display options. And the same thing can be done here. If I choose inline, we'll notice that now the option boxes, rather than going below the heading, are to the right, morning, afternoon, and evening. And so now we have all required fields that are like that are listed but different, if that makes any sense. All right, so let's go on. Let me show you the type of field that allows you to select multiple. So this is called checkboxes, and I'm going to drag it over here and drop. And now we see in the example I downloaded, the user or the simulated user has checked 2 items. But for the most part, the interface is the same. I'm going to click the edit button and call. And so this would be food light. This doesn't make any sense, but we're going to just use this for the sake of the tutorial. So food light. We're going to say apples, oranges. So maybe if you have a meal at your session. That's not. Anyway. All right. So now we have a list of options. And we can see the default has 2 checked. If I uncheck these here, we see that by default the user has no options checked. And of course, if you need them to check one option, you're going to want to make sure that nothing is checked. So what it's going to do is check to see that the user has checked something. If I turn off validation, they can check nothing, and that makes sense in this sense because we don't know, they don't say have to like any of these, but so I'm going to leave it like that. We can also display and turn this inline as well, and then we see the information. But there also is some options in the options. If you notice, we just renamed the 3 options in both examples. We can add items here by clicking the Add Items button and add items. So now I added a 3rd item. I can delete items with the X, so I'm going to do that. Now I have these items. So now we have some different options on the page. We also have, and we won't go into it in depth, but I'll just put it out here for you to see, a select box where we select 1, 2, or 3. This is basically the same as our radio buttons up here, but in a different format. So if you like this format better than displaying all the options open on the page, you can use this option. But these are the kind of foundational elements of the form. There are some extra ones, some sort of more interesting elements. The date field, if I drag that onto here, this gives me a calendar where I can select a date. Really handy for conferences. So you could do something like age. Or more precisely, you would do date of birth here. Now I have a date of birth field. And so if I wanted to set it up, I would select and go back to select my birthday, and then it would submit my birthday. So that's the date field. You can select any date. Validation. Here you can set a range. So if it's date of birth, it doesn't make sense that it can go 2 years to the future. So I'm going to say plus 0 years, because that makes sense. To minus 2 years isn't enough, because if somebody's 20 years old, they're going to be putting 20 years. So I'm going to put minus 100. So anyone 100 years old, we get somebody really old registering, they're going to run into a problem. But anybody, it'll give a date between the last 100 years. But that should give you a sense of those options. So now we're going to take a look at time. Time is also pretty self-explanatory. You select an hour and a minute, and it gives you that information. Display, the same thing, but you have a few more options with 24 hours and 12-hour formats. Validation, do they have to select something from this drop down? Now, another important field is this field set. I'm going to drag this in here, and then I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to say sessions. And I'm going to close this. Now we have a box, if you can see in the middle here, called sessions. What this is really for is grouping content. So if I drag this into here, we can see now that I drag this as well. Now we have our content grouped together in here. It gives the user a sense of organization on the page. So if you have a long form, this is especially important that you group parts of the elements of the form together. So that's really what the field is for. So let's move on to a couple of more fields. Beginning with the file field. I'm going to drag this into the bottom here. What this does is allow a user to upload a file. So if there's a conference presentation, we could expect to have proposals submitted. So here we could say proposals. And now they could upload a proposal. Okay, so now we have a proposal. Now on validation here, you can tell them exactly what type of file you want. And it doesn't make sense that it's an image here. So what we're going to do, we're going to select a PDF or a Word document or a DocX as options for here. So now the user has to upload one of those file types. But if we can see on here, it doesn't tell the user any of that information. And I'm going to talk about how we give the user in general more information on these things. So here we see below there has always been this description field. It is used to give the user more direction on what to do with this particular field. So we're going to say, please upload a proposal of 100 words or less in a Word document. And I'll show you what this looks like. Now we have some directions right below the field. We're going to do the same thing with this food liked, because again, it's not very explanatory. So here we're going to say, please choose your food for the session. And now we see we have the same thing. We have some directional text below the item. And every one of these fields has this option to add this. If I click on email, we'll see that there's a description, your email. And now we have information below the field. So all of these fields have those options as well. The other extended element is the page break. This is very similar to what we talked about during the field set. It allows to organize your content. So what this does is if a user is filling out a form, and you may have done this if you've done a FAFSA or a longer form, you fill out so much information and then you go to the second section. Often it's labeled as background information. Another section is signature or education. Here I just add second page, but it allows you to group elements together in a section on the form. So here I added a page break. So that's the basic elements of the form. The one element that we haven't talked about here is a text area. And what this is, and it'll be familiar to you once I drop it here, is a longer text input. It's where you can put a paragraph. If your proposal was supposed to be pasted right into the page or typed into the page, you could put this in here and type proposal. And they would enter the whole proposal in here. This is an option as well. You can display 5 rows. You can just do 7. That'll grow the boxes you just saw here. Validation, is it required? Do they have to put a proposal? These types of things. But it's basically the same as we've gone through. There's also a markup field. And we'll get, I believe now we are finally at the end of the fields. This markup field allows us to just put some static text in between items. So I'm just going to write new information, and I'm not going to type into here. I'm just going to leave the default. But what you can see here is it gives you just some new information that you could type into here to kind of separate the fields. If you know HTML, this is what it's taking. You can use an online HTML editor such as the Best Online WYSIWYG to create this if you're familiar with it. If you're not and want to do more, you can contact me. But for the basics, you just type text into here, and that will add more information between sections of the form to guide users. So we created most of the form, and I'm going to go into the bottom and save. Drupal always puts the save buttons at the way bottom, so I'm going to click that, and now we have a saved form. And we kind of see what it's going to look like here. But in order to really see what the user sees, there's a View tab in the upper left. I'm going to click on that, and this is the form. As we can see, we have some elements that may look a little different. On the top, we have an indicator telling us where we are in this form. We're on the start page. Because I broke them up in the pages, we're only seeing one page at a time. So I'm going to start filling it out. Eric W. OK. Email eric@w.com. And click next. Page. I'm going to select some options here. And I'm going to select time. I'm not going to upload a file, but if I did, I'd click this and I could add a file. Maybe I'll add one. So I chose a PDF file. I can type something into the proposal area, information for you. And now I'll click the submit button. And now it says, thank you, your submission has been received. So we created a form here with lots of different elements. Next section we're going to go into how do you retrieve the data, how do you respond to the data. and how do we go back and look at it? Kind of what I just said. But thank you.